the most advanced player in a team, usually the center forward, plays to deepen their team's attack, operating on the edge of the opposing defensive line. As a result, the central defenders, who typically play in pairs, have become accustomed to facing a lone forward against the two of them. The norm is for one defender to mark this player closely, while the other provides cover in case the teammate loses the duel. However, there is another way to utilize this advanced player that doesn't necessarily require them to assume the role of deepening the opposition's defense. This role is known as the false nine. The false nine typically aims to occupy the space behind the opposing midfielders, with the intention of inducing the defense line to push up a bit. The absence of a deep-lying reference player can create uncertainty for the defensive pair. What would be the best decision for the defense? Option 1. Allow the false nine to drift and remain free in the space between the lines, creating a numerical advantage in the midfield. Option 2. The defensive line moves up to reduce the space between the lines but increases the space behind them. Option 3. Have one defender track the false nine to prevent them from being free but disrupt the defensive line, creating an opening for the infiltration of another player. This is a question that the defense needs to resolve. While there may not be much video evidence, it is understood that the first team to use this attacking role was the Austrian national team in the 1930s, with Matthias Sindelar in this role. In contemporary football, the most well-known and successful example of the false nine is the role Lionel Messi played at Barcelona under Pep Guardiola in the early 2010s. Perhaps Messi's fluidity in that version of Barcelona was the most destabilizing factor for that team, allowing Messi to link up with the midfielders, Xavi, Iniesta, and Busquets, and, consequently, creating spaces for wingers to infiltrate, usually Pedro and David Villa. However, for the false nine role to be effectively utilized, it is essential for the midfield players to adapt to the forward's movement to avoid positional conflicts. For example, in a 4-2-3-1 formation where the advanced player acts as a false nine with full freedom of movement, the number 10 midfielder needs to read the forward's movements so that the two do not clash positionally. An alternative would be to have the number 10 midfielder excel in attacking the space behind the opposing defense line. That is, as the false nine drops deep, the midfielder advances into the space left behind. It could also happen that the number 10 and the false nine behave like a pair of central midfielders. Two players in this position could overwhelm the opposing defensive midfielders, who would have to contend with two players behind them, just as the center-backs would. However, in this case, the other players, such as wingers and defensive midfielders, would need to be very direct in attacking space, or else the team would lack depth, making it challenging to create scoring opportunities. The relationship between depth and width, which was also explained in the video on creating space, is an important factor to consider in a system using a false nine. Let's explain using a 4-3-3 as an example. As mentioned earlier, in most systems, the player providing depth is usually the most advanced forward. However, when this player behaves as a false nine, this function of providing depth to the team cannot be solely their responsibility because, in this case, they would drop too deep. In other words, other players on the team would have to be responsible for depth and, of course, not sacrifice width. Imagine, for instance, that the wingers are responsible for depth. It would be very difficult for them to fulfill this role if they remained close to the sideline. The ideal is for them to stay closer to the center, in the region between the opposing full-backs and center-backs, to attack the space behind the center-backs when an opportunity arises. But here's the thing. If the wingers are positioned more centrally, they cannot provide width. So, other players would need to take responsibility for width. A common solution is to have full-backs positioned wide to cover the flanks. A good example of this is the Liverpool team that won the 2018-19 Champions League, where Roberto Firmino played as the false nine, with Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane always ready to attack the diagonal space, and the full-backs playing wide to provide width. Fabinho acted as the balance point to give freedom to the full-backs. But if you want the wingers to be the players staying wide on the flanks, seeking one-on-one situations, another option would be midfielders with a strong inclination to enter the penalty area, attacking the space. In this case, a 4-2-3-1 with a midfielder and a box-to-box midfielder making forward runs, might be a good alternative. Pep Guardiola has also used variations of this approach at Manchester City, occasionally deploying Kevin De Bruyne or Bernardo Silva as the false nine. In any case, there are numerous examples of the use of the false nine. Well, there's no magic formula for playing with someone in this role. It all depends on the characteristics of the 11 players on the field and how the coach maximizes their potential. If you'd like to see additional content, I recommend watching the video on creating space in the attack. That's the video that's appearing on the screen. Click and watch it right now.